Hello, my ghosts and ghoulies, and welcome to the very first episode of Hito's Haunted House. Let's take a moment to talk about Amnesia. Amnesia is a first-person survival horror game created by Swedish developers Fytstyxgaming. And interestingly enough, Fytstyxgaming only made one other series of games known as the Penumbra series, which shares similarities to Amnesia being a first-person survival horror game. And since you are already watching this video, I am sure you are well aware about how scary this game really is. This game has forged the popularity of tons of YouTube stars just because people really wanted to see how scary the game is. And they wanted to see how those poor souls enduring the fear would react. And in all honesty, this game is one of the scariest experiences you will ever endure. So with that being said, let's take a look at this beautifully crafted game. The story of Amnesia can be summed up in the opening scene of the game. You wake up in a Prussian castle named Brennenburg with amnesia. I really couldn't see that one coming. The only thing that you do remember is that your name is Daniel and that you must kill a man named Alexander. You must explore this evil place to find and kill this Alexander, all while being hunted by a supernatural entity called the Shadow, and enduring the horrifying surprises the castle Brennenburg has to offer. The rest of that story is told through random flashbacks Daniel has while exploring the mansion, and some of these flashbacks are triggered by various notes found throughout the game. The notes that Daniel can find are written by various inhabitants of the castle, including Alexander and some of the journal entries from Daniel himself. I won't go too far into the story because there's no fun in spoiling it for you. The story uses the theme of amnesia very well, and the use of the notes throughout the game gives an interesting insight to the world around Daniel, but also lets the player experience the story in the way that they want to. They can ignore the notes if they want to and continue the scarefest, or if they're actually interested in the story, they can find all the notes and further the insight on the horrors that took place inside Brennenburg Castle. As stated before, Amnesia is a first-person survival horror game, but much like other survival horror games, it's also a puzzle game. There are a variety of physics-based puzzles, mostly just moving objects to open up blocked paths. But there are also item-based puzzles, collecting random objects and tools to either open up new paths or getting keys to open locked doors. Where Amnesia differs from other survival horror games is that there's no way to defend yourself. Your only means of defense against the horrors of Brennenburg is stealth, meaning that all monster encounters are fatal. This often means hiding in the darkness, listening to the grunting and horrifying sounds the enemies make. Speaking of the darkness, let's talk about the sanity meter. This is a meter that you can see in your inventory that goes from crystal clear, a slight headache, head is pounding and hands are shaking, to ... You reach these levels as Daniel gets more and more scared or by witnessing horrifying things. And what's the purpose of it? To give you a massive headache. All the sanity meter really does is that in the lower stages of it, the screen will warp and distort, making things hard for you to see. As well as Daniel starts to grind his teeth, bugs start crawling all over your vision, and if you fall too deep into the insanity, Daniel will collapse and drag his face against the ground. I'm very torn about the sanity meter because it does serve its purpose. The meter will drain by being in the darkness for prolonged periods of time, which you inevitably will be since your lantern can run out of oil if you use it too much. Also, the fact that the light will attract enemies to you, so you will need to hide in pitch black. The meter will also drastically drop if you're looking directly at the monsters, which totally makes sense. You're not supposed to look at these monsters. No normal person would want to. But the only way for you to fix your sanity is by solving puzzles or picking up key items, which isn't too difficult to begin with, but it can be more difficult when you can't quite see what's going on around you. Which I guess is kind of the point, but regardless, you can see where it serves its purpose, but it can also be a huge pain. What Amnesia does exceedingly well is that it sets the atmosphere for the player. First, the game has little to no music, and the game's soundtrack is very minimal to begin with. Very soft, simple songs that set the mood more for the suspense and horror that awaits you in the castle. Other than that, the game sets the majority of the atmosphere with just the sound effects throughout the game. As you're exploring, you can hear other people's footsteps, the wind blowing through the castle, sounds of the castle crumbling around you, other people's whispers. as well as the sound of the monsters and otherworldly horrors that really get you to start questioning Daniel's sanity and at times your own. But what I think adds to the atmosphere of the game is the shadow. While you never really get to see the shadow, you definitely get to see and feel its effects on the world around you, as it warps and changes the world with these hellish fleshy things, which honestly look more like someone smeared grape jelly around the room. But the shadow also shows its impact on the world by destroying it. As you're exploring, it will shake and destroy parts of the castle. This adds a new level of stress and tension to the player. Not only do they have to explore this mansion and deal with these monstrosities, but they have the stress of being hunted and chased by this supernatural being that is larger than yourself. Something so powerful that it is changing the world around you throughout the entire game. With all the elements of gameplay and atmosphere combined, we already have one of the most unsettling and stressful games to play. But what really makes this game as horrifying as people claim it to be are the monster encounters. The encounter begins with the enemies making one of the most unsettling sounds. From this point on, your only option is to hide and hope they haven't seen you, all while listening to the grunting and groaning of the monster trying to track you down. But if you're not so fortunate and the enemy has seen you, run. You will be chased by this horrible abomination, all while listening to this nerve-wracking screeching sound. Your only hope is to really escape into another room and hide while you listen to the monster break down the door to find you. These experiences have rendered myself and many others into whimpering babies, and for a good reason. A combination of the horrifying images, the stress of the hunt, as well as the nerve-wracking waiting in the dark leaves the player with an extremely unsettling and terrifying experience. One of the most unique things about the enemies in this game is they all use the concept of body horror well. All of the monsters, or at least the ones that you can see, are all very human-like in appearance but heavily deformed. Deformed in ways that make you cringe and squirm thinking about your own body twisting into that abomination. While these are all good things, there are a few issues with the game that really irks me. The big issue with a lot of the monster encounters is that they tend to become rather predictable. Enter a new area, monster encounter. Pick up a new item to progress in the game, monster encounter. While they are still very scary overall, the predictability can really put you out of the experience. Another big issue I have with the monster encounters is the music. After successfully losing a monster or avoiding it altogether, a track will play that alerts you that the monsters are still looking for you. This adds a lot of atmosphere and tension to the hunt, but with one major flaw. After the monster is left, the music will stop. It may take a few encounters to realize this, but once you do, the tension of hiding is immediately removed. You have made this mental connection that hiding and sucking on your thumb in the corner will all end when the music stops. This may be a huge sigh of relief for most players, but for myself, this removed my fear, which is a somewhat disappointing endeavor. By now I hope you see how scary and how nerve-wracking this game is, and it's honestly one of the scariest games I have played in years. The atmosphere is done beautifully, the monster encounters are horrifying, and the gameplay and mechanics are done very interestingly and very, very immersive. I would definitely recommend this game to anybody who is looking for a good scare. But, since this is the inaugural episode of Hito's Haunted House, this will be a special 2-for-1. And with the success of the first game, naturally, a sequel had to be made. So, 3 years after the release of Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs was released. And interestingly enough, this game was not developed by Frictional Games, but rather, it was developed by a British indie company known as The Chinese Room. With this being said, there were some differences between the original and its sequel. The story of the game is almost a copy and paste from the original Amnesia. You wake up, but this time in a mansion, as Oswald Mandis with, I'll give you one guess what you wake up with. Go on, I'll wait. Amnesia! Rather than being on the hunt for a man named Alexander, you're actually looking for your 2 children. While you are looking for your boys, you are contacted by a voice on the phone telling you that they know where your kids are, and instruct you to turn on a machine for pigs to get to them. Much like the original, the rest of the story is told through Mandis' flashbacks as he's exploring, as well as assorted notes left by Mandis and various people. A new element to their storytelling is through recorded conversations between Mandis and an individual known as the Professor, which you can hear by playing the random phonographs you find throughout your descent into madness. Much like the original, the gameplay consists of a first-person survival horror theme with stealth elements. But a big change to the game is the lack of an inventory. No longer are you required to find keys or puzzle items, but rather you solve the majority of your puzzles through the physics engine, picking up items and moving it to where it needs to go, or pushing obstacles out of your way to open doors in new areas. This may have been a welcome change for many players, however, I felt that this is one of the game's fatal flaws. It removes the need for exploration throughout the game. Your problems and the solution to those problems are directly in front of you and require little to no forethought in your actions. Rather, your focus is to figure out a very simple physics-based puzzle, which is nice to progress the story, but on the flip side, removes a bit of involvement from you as the player. The removal of the inventory also removed the need for you to pick up health items as well as oil for your lantern. For your lantern, the time period of this game is set where electricity is being used, so your lantern is replaced with an electric one, giving you unlimited uses, as well as the ability to turn on and off lights rather than scrounging for tinderboxes. But so far as your health is concerned, one would think that this would make the game a little bit more challenging. Nope, instead you have the typical FPS hide behind something and suck on your thumb while you recover health. Oh sure, I just got mauled by a horrible abomination from another realm. Let me just sit here and relax while my wounds magically heal themselves. It's stupid and asinine! The last and probably my favorite change to the sequel as a whole is the lack of the insanity meter. And thank God! This is a great feature since it means no more headaches! It means no more wandering around with your drunk goggles on as you're trying to progress in the game. The only downfall is that the monster encounters are in plain sight, which I felt was a huge success in the Dark Descent scares. When you really couldn't tell what the enemy looks like, your imagination went wild and created a new nightmare every time you saw the enemies. This might not have been the best change for the overall experience of the game, but no more headaches, so it's a plus for me. The atmosphere, much like its predecessor, is done masterfully. With all the sounds of the wind and just the world around you, it is very easy to lose yourself in the world. The only big difference in A Machine for Pigs is the lack of the shadow. But instead we're given the Machine for Pigs, which will shake the world around you as you continue to turn it on. While the Machine for Pigs primarily sticks to very mechanical sounds, it will sound like it's bellowing and grumbling as it's being turned on. Many players might have felt like it was just the sounds of a large machine for pigs, but as you listen to all the sounds it makes and the impact on the world around you as it shakes and rumbles the town, it feels as if the Machine for Pigs is actually a living, breathing thing that you're waking up. It sets an amazing tone for the game, as well as adding various layers to the atmosphere. Concerning the scares in this game, well, there aren't any. The game is set up in such a way where the developers tried to emulate the same level of fear that the Dark Descent set up. But because of the game mechanics, they shot themselves in the foot. As I mentioned before, with the lack of the sanity meter, the monstrosities you face lack any mystery to them. You can look them right in the face and observe every gruesome detail they have. The exact opposite of what made the monster encounters in the first game amazing. On top of this, with the title of the game and the initial concept for the monsters, it further removed any mystery in what was in store for you. Just the name alone gave away everything about the monsters. A Machine for Pigs. I wonder what kind of enemy I'll be dealing with. I really can't be too hard on this, because the developers did do a very smart thing with the monster encounters. In the Dark Descent, they did that really annoying music and screeching sound when you're being chased by the monsters, and once you realized the music stopped, you were free to go. In Machine for Pigs, there is no music. If you lose the enemy, you still have no idea if it's chasing you or not. There are no cues, and that's what makes dealing with the piggies at least a little enjoyable. But then again, they just replaced that feature with another element that removes the tension even more. Remember how you had an electric lantern? Well, if a piggy was nearby, your lantern and the lights around you would flicker, which is kind of neat. It somewhat replaces the insanity meter by masking what the enemy looks like in a strange kind of strobe light effect, but it has the same fault as the music from the original. Once you make the connection that the lights will only flicker when the monsters are around, it kind of removes the fear of exploring a new area, because you already know something's ahead of you. The few things that Machine for Pigs did exceedingly well are the various mindfuck situations in the game. There are a few moments where you go into a room, turn around, and the door you just came from is now gone. Or times where you just teleport to another room and have no idea how you got there. These kinds of moments are my favorites because it really gets the player confused in their own actions in the sense that, was there really a door there? Or wait, did I come from there? Or did I go from here? Not to mention, these set up great narrative themes of trying to figure out Manus' own sanity as well as your own. The big thing about A Machine for Pigs is that it's a great story. I specifically didn't want to talk too much about the story in either The Dark Descent or Machine for Pigs because they're both very interesting mysteries to follow. But so far as the gameplay of Machine for Pigs is concerned, it has a very interesting and very solid narrative, and it felt like the developers wanted to push that narrative more than the gameplay itself. They made the game feel almost like walking through a haunted house rather than exploring the world around you. It has all the immersion, and the story and narrative is interestingly enough to keep the players invested, but it just did not capitalize on the scares that the first game set up. I honestly had a great time playing both games, but I felt that the first game is just much better, either with the scares, the atmosphere, just everything about it just comes together to make it the beautifully crafted game that it is known for today. But by all means, try out both these titles, and let me know if you can tell them.